If you have a true scary story you want to hear on the channel, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to send it my way. And of course, thank you. I finally got the chance to write out something that happened to me when I was a young adult. This was back in the late 90s, when I was working as a tow truck driver. I worked on call on the overnight shift, and after finishing a job, I stopped at a gas station to fill up so I wouldn't have to worry about it if I did get a call in the middle of the night. Better to do it around midnight, rather than 3 in the morning when you just want to get back home and back in bed. I remember it was autumn because it was a lot cooler, so I could have my windows down comfortably all night. I pulled into the gas station, one that I had stopped at plenty of times before. The parking lot was pretty empty, and there was a car parked on the side of the gas station building that was off. My first thought was that it was either someone that worked there or maybe someone else that stopped for something other than gas. I didn't pay any more attention than that. But as I started fueling up, I heard a very loud pop coming from the store. It made me jump, and I looked over to see if I could figure out what it was. But all I saw was a man in a mask jumping over the counter and running out the door. I remember being frozen in place. I didn't know if I should go in and check on those in there, or if I should hide, or hell, if I should just leave and save myself. But before I could even make a choice, the man in the mask noticed me and we made eye contact. He quickly approached me, raising the gun, and asked me, "What did you see?" I kept my hands up and my head to the ground and said, "Nothing. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything." We stayed like this for a few seconds, until he shoved me and said, "Get back in your truck and leave, now." As I walked back to my truck, he shouted at me to hurry up, so I started the truck and left before I even got my seatbelt on. I watched from the mirrors he stood in the parking lot watching me until I was completely out of view. I know I got out of there unscathed, but it kept eating at me. What if he had shot someone at the station? What if they were dead, or dying and no one was there to help? Would anyone show up there to help? So I made a pretty crazy decision and headed back. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, but I did have my radio in the truck. I immediately called it in and told them that I think I witnessed a robbery, and told them to get the police there as soon as possible. Then I turned around to head back. When I got back, the car on the side was gone, assuming it was the robbers, so I pulled in and waited before getting out to make sure no one ran up to my truck. When no one came up, I quickly jumped out and ran into the station. I saw just what I was worried about. The old man that owned the place was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, with a bullet wound in his stomach. And then there was a younger girl laying next to him, her face bruised and cut. Both of them were unconscious. I knew it probably wasn't that long, but the police hadn't arrived yet, so I grabbed the wall phone behind the counter and called 911. While on the phone, the lady said they already had someone on the way, but asked for the status of the victims. She asked me to apply pressure to the wounds on the man to prevent further bleeding. Thankfully, it wasn't long before an ambulance showed up, followed by the police. They got the man in the ambulance and left pretty quickly, while another group worked on the girl. While I was talking to the police outside, they wheeled the girl out, who was now awake but still looked rough. I explained to the cops what all I had witnessed, and one of them thanked me for radioing it in. They explained that the man had lost a lot of blood, and since the girl hadn't woken up, he could have died if I hadn't. That's when I knew that I did the right thing, even if it could have cost me my life. After giving them my contact information, I was told that I could leave. I went home to my wife and kids, still a bit shaken up, and explained to my wife what had happened. She was usually asleep when I left, but she said that she woke up to a bad feeling when I hadn't returned within the normal amount of time. She called the office to ask about me, and they had said they hadn't heard from me yet. I would actually end up radioing into them right after she called. After talking through it, she said that she was proud of me for going back and calling it in, even if it was risky, knowing that she would want someone to do the same for her if she was the victim. We were both up for another hour or so before we finally fell back to sleep. The next day, I got a call from the cop who wanted to go through the details again. They said they also had the footage and wanted to confirm the identity of the man. I met them at the same gas station, and I watched the grainy footage of what happened in the store. I watched the man reach for the gun, causing him to shoot. The girl started to panic, and he had actually pistol whipped her a couple of times. Then he jumped over the counter and out the door. We then watched the footage of me in the parking lot as the guy held the gun to my chest, and then I drove away. After I confirmed it all, he also asked if he could give my contact details to the victim. Apparently the girl was his daughter, and they had both been working there that night, and they wanted to thank me for coming back to help them. So, I agreed. I actually went to see them in the hospital, and the girl was looking better. She still had 2 black eyes and some stitches and scrapes on the side of her face, but she still had a sense of humor with the whole, "you should see the other guy." They did catch the guy as they were able to see his car and license plate, which belonged to the guy's mother who worked for USPS. But anyway, they both thanked me for what I did, but I would like to think that I would do it again in a heartbeat, if it meant I could help just one person. For the remaining time I worked at the tow company, I would go to the same station for gas, even if it was out of the way. They actually gave me free coffee and day-old donuts anyways. Now, in 2024, I'm grateful for the technology we have. Better cameras and a cell phone on us pretty much at all times. It makes me a lot quicker to help, but thankfully, I haven't had to do something like that since. I wanted to share an experience with you that I had when I worked at a gas station. This was back when I was in my mid-20s. I had made some mistakes as a young adult. I didn't have the best parents. One I actually never met, and my mom clearly wasn't ready to be a parent. Thus, I became a pretty rebellious teenager. I myself fell in love with a guy that was 10 years older than me, and when I became pregnant at 18, I was under the impression that everything was going to be alright, and the man I was with would support us. So I finished high school but made no plans on bettering myself career-wise, expecting to just be caring for a child for a few years at least. But the honeymoon phase was over before it began when my baby's father quit his job and expected me to pick up the slack while he did God knows what. And that's how I ended up working for a gas station for over a decade. Not many were willing to hire someone who was barely 20 with no experience. This place that I worked at was nice. The people there certainly became more family than my biological ones, other than my sister, who also had a different father that also wasn't in the picture. They knew I had a baby at home, and they were always flexible with me. Ruth, the owner, even cleaned up a small area in the back so I could set up my daughter's playpen to bring her with me. I ended up doing this more often as I couldn't trust her father to watch her either. He quickly became an alcoholic, and I learned that he wasn't a very nice one either. Now, seeing what my mom went through with her various boyfriends, I knew the red flags, and I understood my choices would affect more than just myself, so I knew I had to get out. I dealt with him for 4 years, and I finally decided to take action. When I was 21, I was able to take on more shifts at the station. I would work overtime, I would cover other people's shifts, whatever I could pick up for extra money. Working the night or overtime meant a nice bonus, and I even asked Ruth to cut my checks into two, keeping any time over the 80 hours separate. I cashed those and saved the money so that my ex would only see the flat 80. Yes, he always took my checks. That's how possessive he was. This was also many years ago, so I got a paper check and we cashed it out. And I didn't have a bank account. I was only 18 when I started working and had no idea how to even go about getting an account. Now, after explaining my pity story, sorry, this is how I ended up in the situation that I'm telling you about today. I had started working the overnight shifts. It was rough at first, but being on my feet and keeping busy definitely helped. I also had my daughter with me since she was asleep most of the time there anyways, and no one was really around to disturb her. My ex was typically home at night drinking, so it was a win-win for me anyways. I told him they needed me to work overnights, but that I didn't get any extra pay for it, making it seem like I was disappointed about it. He was none the wiser. Anyway, there I was, working late into the night while my daughter slept peacefully in the back. I kept the door cracked open so I could hear her cry if she woke up. It was probably around 3 or 4 in the morning. I had just gotten my second wind, which was typically about when that happened for me. I started organizing the impulse items near the register and counter, which then spiraled into me deep cleaning because it clearly hadn't been done in quite some time. I was crouching behind the counter when I heard the bell ring, indicating someone had entered. I yelled out, "Hey, welcome in," or something to that effect. The only response I got was a slight grunt, and then the person began whistling. It was a bit odd, but it was also 4 in the morning. The people I saw at that time were typically under the influence, homeless people just needing some respite from the summer heat, or others just getting off work. Based on his response, I assumed it may have been the former. Either way, I know that I have to keep an eye on people, so I stood up to look at the customer. What I saw I never could have expected. It was an older man, tall and gaunt looking. He wore a long overcoat that he was practically swimming in. He had on a baseball cap that was streaked with yellow and brown stains. But the biggest problem that I had with him was the enormous sledgehammer he had resting on his shoulder. My heart immediately dropped. I had never been in a situation like this at work. We had never been robbed, at least not in the time that I worked there, and the most violence we had ever seen was a guy kicking over the trash can because he didn't win his scratch-off tickets. So, was this guy really about to try something with a sledgehammer? I watched him walk down an aisle, look over several items, and pick up one of the canned food items and then put it back down. Then he walked down another aisle and stopped whistling long enough to smile at the item he grabbed. Then, he started back up again, walking toward the front. I quickly looked away, trying to act casual, not wanting to give him any reason to try something, hopefully. Once he reached the counter, he tossed down a single pack of D batteries and stopped whistling. He looked at me with a smirk, and I asked him if that was all he needed. "Y'all don't sell VHS tapes, do you?" Now, this was some time ago, but I hadn't seen VHS camcorders in quite some time, and our random little gas station certainly wasn't selling them and never had. I politely told him, "No, sorry, we don't," and rang up his batteries. He groaned as he tossed down a very crumpled and slightly damp bill, and I gave him his change. He shoved his change in his pocket with the batteries and then turned to walk away before pausing. He looked back at me, smiling, and those few seconds felt like an eternity. I studied his face, worried that I may have to recall it later. His face had deep lines across his forehead, and by his eyes with his skin looking tightly stretched over his cheekbones and jawline. It kind of reminded me of that alien from Men in Black, where he pulled his face tight so that it wasn't too loose, but it was like he forgot to pull his forehead tight. He seriously looked unnatural. Then he spoke to me in a low and curious tone. "You look just like her, you know? You look just like my Emma." I didn't know what to say, so I stared back with my head lopsided like a confused dog. "She was beautiful, my Emma. Just like you, and smart. But she just didn't understand. It couldn't see the truth." He curled his fingers toward me, wanting me to come closer. "Do you see the truth, I wonder?" I sat back up, wanting to escape his breath and intimidating stare. I was still frozen with fear, and his choice of conversation did not help the situation. Then he went to adjust how the hammer was resting on his shoulder, but it made me flinch. He looked back at me with his smile wider now. "Do you know what this is for?" I shook my head, still unable to speak. "It's for breaking down walls. Like the walls we build in our heads. The walls that keep us from seeing." He then looked directly into my eyes, and I felt like I was being interrogated. Hell, I would have confessed whatever he wanted me to at this time just to get him to stop staring at me. Emma couldn't see past her walls, but I helped her. I helped her see. He then laid his hand flat palm down on the counter. He mentioned how sometimes we need to break things in order to reveal the truth. Only then can we repair. He began walking towards the door, and then he opened it, and I exhaled, thinking the weird interaction was over. But he turned toward me once more. "You have such beautiful walls. I wonder what truths they hide." Then he walked out whistling. I watched as he walked to the right, down the sidewalk until he was out of my sight. He hadn't even driven there. He had walked. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I could hardly breathe. I went to lock the door and then ran to the back with my daughter. Thankfully, she was still sound asleep. I called the police to report whatever had happened, and they said that they would send someone over. Once they arrived, I realized just how stupid I sounded. I explained that a guy came in with a sledgehammer and what all he had said to me, still not able to forget it. They looked at me like I was crazy until I showed them the camera footage. There was no sound, but you could still make out some of the mouth movements and could see the fear written all over my face. They said they would keep an eye out for him, but since he didn't necessarily threaten me or do anything, there was little they could do other than question him for being a suspicious person. I honestly didn't care. I just felt better about telling someone about him rather than keeping it to myself. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, and I never did see him after that. But, man, there was a time that I had a slight panic attack anytime someone came in when I was working alone and at night. I continued working there for many years after. In fact, I even became a manager. I was able to get away from my ex and get a good place for myself and my daughter on that income, which was a blessing. And even though I was a wreck after that night for some time, I would do it all over again. Just, I would prefer to not ever meet that guy again. When I was 18, I started working at a gas station right outside the city that I lived in. It was probably a 15-minute drive tops, which worked out in case I had to get a ride to and from work. I had a pretty crappy hand-me-down car that didn't like to run when it was too hot or too cold, or any day that ended with a Y. You get the idea. And since I was still living at home, my parents or older brother would sometimes take me to work. So it was nice working close. I chose to work there because, one, they were one of the few people that actually called me in for an interview, and really, I just needed something to do after I graduated, while I figured out what I was doing with my life. Yeah, the pay wasn't great, but I worked with some pretty cool people, and the job itself was pretty simple. At least, most of the time. The lunch rush was a bit annoying, or Sunday afternoons after church let out. Our gas station seemed to be the place to go to continue sermon. But regardless, I could handle it, and it certainly made the day fly by. But sometimes we got some odd people, or the occasional drunk that would try to cause problems, and being a smaller girl, I stayed back to let the others handle those. But this story is actually about one of those times that I seemed to be in the center of it all. It was a late night, and we had just finished cleaning up the hot food stations. We shut them down at 9 p.m., and they have to be thoroughly cleaned. They were pretty close to the register, so I was also in charge of ringing people up. Susan was out by the pump sweeping and cleaning up around the area. She's an older lady that's been there forever, so I feel like they just let her do whatever she wants because cleaning the parking lot isn't even on the checkoff list, or something we were ever told to do. Then Anthony was in the back juggling the tasks of back office work and some inventory prep. Anthony was actually a good friend of my brother's, who I had a bit of a crush on at the time, so I was happy to work with him. He was always really nice to me and looked out for me, so really the job wasn't bad at all. So anyways, that was our setup for the night. I was pretty much it for the front of the store, but it wasn't unusual for me either. While I was wiping down the shields, I saw a van pull up out front. They had parked across 3 parking spots, and seemed to hit their brakes pretty hard, based on how the car lurched forward. The van looked like one of those old Chevy travel vans. My dad used to have one identical to it, but it was red instead of green. Wanting to see the idiot that parked like that, I continued to watch as a man got out of the driver's seat, walked around and up to the door, and entered the gas station. The man looked to be in his mid-40s, average height with buzz-cut hair. In all honesty, he looked pretty normal. That is, until he started talking. I greeted him as I normally do, and when he spotted me, he quickly advanced towards me. "Oh, thank God. I'm having some car troubles. Would you mind taking a look at it?" I immediately chuckled at this comment. I was this little 18-year-old girl. What made this grown man think that I, of all people, knew anything about cars? "I'm sorry, sir, I would have no clue. I don't know anything about cars beyond putting gas in them." "Oh, come on. You look like a smart girl. I'm sure you could figure it out." Why was this guy so adamant that I looked in his van, and that I could fix it? It was weird. I again pushed back to say that I couldn't help, and even offered to go get Anthony as he might be able to help, but the guy was insistent that I should help him. He began begging me. He offered to pay me in cash or beer. I told him I wasn't even old enough to drink, reminding him again that I was only 18. And then he hit me with, "Well, I've got a litter of puppies in the back. You can have one if you want." That's when I realized just how messed up this whole thing was sounding. So I told him in a very firm voice, "Sir, I'm not a child. I'm not going to go out to your van for anything, and I can't help you with it." He immediately tried to go back to pouting and begging, when thankfully Anthony walked back into the lobby. "Is everything okay here? Can I help you with something, sir?" He tried shaking his head, but I immediately stepped back towards Anthony and told him that he was having car troubles and asked me to take a look. Anthony looked at both of us funny and then kind of laughed. He told the man that he could see if he could help, but the man shouted, "No, I want the girl." That was the comment that really scared me. This now seemed like more than just car troubles. Anthony then took a step forward to be in front of me and told him firmly, "Look, man, you and I both know she's not going out there. So either I can help you, or you can leave." The man stared at us for what felt like several minutes. He looked angry. I thought he might try to do something to Anthony, but instead, he called me a name and then stormed out of the store. We watched from the door as he walked around to get back in the driver's side, and to my surprise, I watched another guy sit up in the passenger seat. I didn't even know someone else was in there. And just as quickly as he pulled up, he also burned out of the parking lot, making Susan come back inside and ask what that was all about. I explained to both of them what all had happened, and even Susan laughed and said, "Puppies? What is this, the 1950s?" We all laughed and tried to shrug it off, but honestly, it still kinda spooked me. He drove it into the parking lot just fine and left in the van just fine. And he was adamant that I had to help him. Why me? The fact that he tried so hard and even tried bribing me made me feel really uncomfortable. I was ready to just let it go, and thankful that he was gone, but Anthony was insistent on calling the police to report it. To my surprise, they came by and took it very seriously. They even said they had reports of a suspicious van that had been driving around some nearby neighborhoods that was reported by parents. They saw the van slow down and even stop in front of their place, but would drive away when they went outside or tried to call out to them. They never came back and told us they caught him or anything, so I'm not sure if they did or not, but that certainly did not make me feel any better. If it was the same guy, then was he trying to abduct me? For weeks afterwards, I became kind of paranoid anytime there was a guy that came in alone, as bad as that sounds. I made sure that I had a ride to and from work beforehand, so that way I wasn't waiting around alone. Not that Anthony allowed me to, though. He made me wait in the back, which was nice. I only worked there for about a year after that. The store got robbed the next year, and that traumatized me pretty badly. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but you really start to reevaluate your life when you're staring down a barrel. But that was my experience working at a gas station, and all I can say is thanks for the experience, but so long. I will not miss it. So that, my friends, was a collection of some scary or creepy, however you want to look at it, gas station stories. Stories where the horror is at the pump and it's not the price you're paying. Ha 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 ha. Hopefully, you all enjoyed these stories. These stories where the scary story takes place at a gas station. Gas station stories, whatever. What am I babbling about at this point? You know what these stories are. I know what these stories are. They're out there. They're not an infrequent type of story, so yeah. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button. It helps a lot. There's no obligation to do so, but if you do, just know I appreciate you. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as I do content non-stop. Not non-stop, but frequently. Some months it's kind of non-stop, but for the most part it's just frequently, at least 3 times a week. And yeah. You can also go down below the video and leave me a comment with your thoughts, how you're doing, how your week's going, how your weekend's going, if you have any plans this weekend, so forth and so on. If you've got a story like this, you can go to astheravendreams.com and send it my way. You can also email it to me, astheravendreams@gmail.com. You can join Patreon memberships, get early access to content like this, and other things, depending on what you sign up for. You can do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel, but never expected, always appreciated. And you can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, anywhere you want to listen, or YouTube, if that's what you prefer. It's completely up to you. There's probably more I'm forgetting, because there seems to always be more to add to these outros, but one day, I'll add everything. And that outro will go for 25 minutes. Yeah. Anyways, hopefully you'll have a beautiful week. Hope I do see you again here very, very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until next time, my friends, much love. Sleep well.